All right. It is the week of April 22nd, 2024, and this is the Fight Business Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Auger, and I know it's been a minute, ladies and gentlemen, but we are back and we have a lot of ground to cover. First up, I'm going to talk about something that happened a couple of weeks ago, which is Endeavor going private. A lot to break down there, and I'll give my analysis as to why I think Endeavor and Silver Lake decided to take the company private, especially since Endeavor had only been public for less than 3 years. Then we're going to talk about UFC 300 from a business perspective. Obviously, an amazing night of fights, but a lot of numbers have been thrown around by the promotion, ESPN, some media outlets that we need to break down and determine which ones are significant and which ones are kind of fluff. Also, going to talk about the impact of UFC 300 moving forward for the promotion as a whole. Then we're going to do some quick hits. And last but not least, we're going to talk about PFL's expansion into Europe. A big signing with Paul Hughes, a couple other names rumored to be signing with PFL. They're making their way further and further into the European market. Is this the right strategy? And will it help them finally start to claw away at the UFC's giant market share? I'm going to break all that down and more. Timestamps at the bottom, as always. And let's go ahead and dive right in. All right. So first up, we're going to talk about something that happened about 3 weeks ago, but I feel like is important enough. We really need to dissect it, and that is Endeavor going private. So this deal occurred April 2nd, and was essentially Silver Lake valued Endeavor at 13 billion, meaning current stockholders are getting paid out at $27.50. They halted the stock, which is common when this happens. And it had a bit of a pop before it was halted. I think it was trading around 22 something, maybe 22.40s, and then jumped up to 25.26 before the trade halt, which rightfully so. This is obviously you're getting paid out at a premium if you own Endeavor stock. If you can get before they halt trading, that means you are guaranteed a profit, which everybody loves. So that's very common when you have announcements. Same thing happened with Twitter going private when Elon Musk bought it. It's a common thing. But this is something where we kind of knew this was coming, right? Both Endeavor and Silver Lake had signaled that this was pretty much going to happen. Endeavor had said they were going to review strategic alternatives. They were dissatisfied with Wall Street's valuation and where the stock price was at. And Silver Lake was the rumored buyer, had kind of signaled to other firms like, hey, we're going to probably take this private. So, don't try and challenge us. And they had enough stock already and just the relationship with Endeavor. It was basically them saying, like, hey, back off anybody thinking you could buy Endeavor because we're going to make a strong bid and make sure we get it type of deal. So don't waste your time, your energy, your resources, all that fun stuff. And so this is a very interesting situation in that it is a great example of a company being taken private, not out of duress. So in my consulting life, day job, right? I've seen multiple startups end up getting taken private because they were in trouble and essentially a P and E firm or a private company comes in and buys them out of duress. Uh, Happens usually in the growth phase where they're like, 30 to 50 employees and then go to 200, 400 when they're in that transition or right after the transition. Can happen for a lot of reasons. Maybe the product didn't really work out, the market shifted. Maybe it was a fad product where it was great for right now, but then new technology or new concerns or something else popped up and it just couldn't sustain the growth momentum. So the company kind of shrinks and falls back. And, this is when a lot of P&E firms see some value there and they want to purchase the company to extract that value and get rid of the rest, right? That's often what happens when you hear a company being taken private is okay, this was sold to a private equity firm. They're going to strip it for parts essentially, like what actually has value, what can they sell off to others, what can they repackage it as, make a profit and then they'll sell it to somebody else. That's generally what happens. This is a rare instance, or at least maybe not rare. Rare isn't the right word. I would say rare-ish, and definitely one you don't think of immediately. Where Endeavor was doing fine in terms of financials, their stock price just wasn't where it was, and you had Creative Artists Agency (CAA), which was the main competitor to WME, William Morris Endeavor, the talent agencies, right? People that represent all the Hollywood actors, Entourage, Ari Gold's character is apparently based off of Ari Emanuel. So like think that type of stuff. If you're old enough to remember Entourage, because I it's been a while. But CAA was taken private by French billionaire Francois Henri Pinault. I think I'm saying that right. And that was taken private for $7 billion. And when that happened, Ari was pretty upset and said, Endeavor's worth at least 10, 12, several multiples of that. 10, 12, 15 billion, at least for all of our assets. It infuriated him, right? He made no bones about it. He was very public in his dissatisfaction with where Endeavor sat compared to CAA getting bought out by this billionaire for a pretty good valuation. So to see this happen, you have to go back and think about Ari's initial pitch to take this company public, right? That was back in 2019, which we covered it then a little bit on one of the earlier first Fight Business podcast episodes. But this was a weird time in the market where it was the end of the printing money era for VCs and PEs for unicorn tech startups. The thought behind this era was essentially we're going to find the next Facebook, we're going to find the next Twitter, right? We're going to find the next big tech company. It's going to make us so much money that we're going to pump money into all these small companies and one of them's bound to work out. And as long as one works out, it'll pay tenfold. It's basically like spreading your bets across a roulette wheel, right? As long as one of them hits the right way, doesn't matter all the other money and all the other small bets you made because it's going to pay off, you know, so much. Who cares about that money? And so it's hedging in a lot of ways too. But there was a time period, right, where VCs just went wild with this. WeWork is the best example with I forget his first name, but CEO Newman, right, who was just so good at selling. He convinced SoftBank and several other investors that WeWork was going to be the next big company, the next big tech company, and it ended up being valued in 2019 at $47 billion, which is insane. Last year, I think in June-ish, it was valued at 360.9 million. So just a ridiculous drop off. But I mean, it was just a, co-working, like shared space. It was a co-working space company that would rent out places in downtowns or certain areas, and you'd go and you pay for it to have kind of a mobile office or a shared space for remote, right? And I mean, obviously the pandemic hurt them bad, but it even if the pandemic hadn't happened, they were already in trouble in 2019. And Uber, things like that, Lyft, companies that are out there and had their name out there, but they weren't actually producing revenue, or sorry, not revenue, profit. They were very unprofitable. They weren't producing the results that investors wanted them to see. And in 2019, things really took a shift. And so Ari and Co were out there really trying to sell Endeavor's whole, universe of Endeavor content, supplying, the actors and things into Endeavor content funded shows and movies and all the other things they had bought, UFC, the things they invested in, UFC PBR, all this other stuff, the European Basketball League. They had this flywheel, this Endeavor flywheel on location, where they were going to use all of these different capabilities together to create new synergies. And this was going to be something that everybody would want to invest in. It was going to be the next big thing, and especially with UFC, right? That was something where UFC was very hot at the time. It was just about to get red hot from the pandemic and just being one of the first sports back. But they thought for sure people were going to eat this up. And they went and hit the pavement and tried to figure this out. And eventually got enough feedback that said, no, if you try and take this public, like we don't have the appetite for your initial offering price, which I think was 22, 23 or something. Like we don't have that appetite. So no, we're not going to bite on this. We're looking very closely at and looking for profitability and all these other things. We're not going to do that. And they just couldn't sell it to investors. So they didn't go public in 2019, ended up going public in 2021. Again, I think the UFC was a huge part of that because that kind of bolstered, like, hey, look at how amazing this is. This was one of the first sports back in the pandemic. It was the first sport back in the pandemic. So now we've got all these odds, got all these superstars from other sports talking about watching the fights. We've got these new, getting crazy ratings, crazy pay per view buys because there's not much else going on as other things are starting to open. And by 2021, they had made progress in that too, right? But still, like, it was it brought UFC to the forefront. It made it a little bit of an easier sell where, okay, maybe you don't fully get the Endeavor flywheel, but you understand UFC, so we can run with that. And the issue was they went public, and even when they went public, it just didn't work how they wanted it to. Um, you know, on opening day, Endeavor was a stock of Endeavor, a share of stock of Endeavor, $25.20. It dropped to its low down to around 17.72 a share. And keep in mind, this is a great illustration of the disconnect between fundamentals and where a share price will be because they had shed quite a bit of debt, had paid things down early. UFC was doing very, very well. And we've talked about it on this podcast multiple times where Endeavor had a ton of debt and the UFC was the crown jewel, the lifeblood, where so much of the UFC's profit went into paying down Endeavor's debt and paying off dividends and all of that fun stuff. But they had done a good job of navigating, okay, we've got this huge crushing debt. We're going to pay it down. We're going to restructure some things. We're going to use On Location, which we bought to do our VIP events for UFC and for other certain things. We're going to cross promote all this stuff. They started selling off some other things. They bought IMG Arena for betting odds and sending information on UFC to sports books, which was, basically sports books have to pay them to get this information sent to them on where odds are placed and info on fighters and all this fun stuff. They were making moves and using the UFC's profitability, which was again still very profitable, where they were getting into a better situation. They weren't this dead ridden, like, oh no, if something happens to the UFC, we're crushed. They were slowly climbing out of that. So they do all this, and then they spin off the UFC into TKO with the merger with WWE, where they purchase WWE, create TKO. They spin off a fair amount of debt, which that's where a lot of Endeavor's debt came from, was all of that leverage to buy the UFC originally. They do that. They spin off a fair amount of debt. They're still 51% owners of TKO. Um, it makes a lot of sense to merge those two together. You get synergies that we're seeing now, and we'll talk about later in the show, where you've got tons of crossover and potential crossover that is an easy sell, at least, right? Whether or not that will actually happen and you'll get crossover fans and cross pollination, that's yet to be seen. But at least logistically and some of the behind the scene things, you can already see some of the efficiencies they've been able to put in place, and some of the things they're doing with events, UFC events, and WWE events over the same weekend, or some other stuff. It's an easier sell to the market, but the market still didn't really take it, right? Like, it popped a little bit, stocks seemed to go back up, but then it slowly trickled back down. And part of that was, people were saying, oh, PFL's investment from overseas was going to be an issue and they were going to be a competitor. There was the lawsuits that were still out there at the time. But ultimately, all this stuff, right, and the share price came down to Ari and Co.'s ability to sell this idea of Endeavor to Wall Street, to investors, institutional and individual, to say, look, here are all our capabilities. Here's how we think we can use some of these companies we've bought together to make a 1 + 1 = X rather than a 1 + 1 = 2. So that value just keeps growing. And they couldn't pitch it. That's a huge, huge part of just the market in general nowadays, right? Like, we've seen Sam Bankman Fried and all this stuff on crypto where this kid was playing League of Legends or whatever while he's pitching to investors like, hey, I want to, be this crypto responsible crypto company that exchange that does all these things, and gets uses the money for good and all this stuff. Everybody everywhere is going to be able to buy a banana with a bit not Bitcoin, a FTX thing, right? Like a different crypto coins and using this exchange. And he's pitching this while he's playing a video game, but the pitch is just so easy and he's a good enough salesman that people are eating it up. And, again, that turned into one of the biggest frauds and financial scandals of our time. But it was an easy sell. People got the concept. They got the idea right away. He was able to sell them on the vision. With Endeavor, it's very hard to paint the vision clearly and concisely in a way that people can digest quickly and see, yes, I recognize that value. I understand it. Right. There are so many moving parts in this because when it comes to WME and the talent agency piece, talent agencies are in a way like other like professional sports, right? Where or really college NIL stuff is probably the best example right now, where people jump ship all the time, right? You could be WME 1 minute, then CAA the next, and it's not a big deal, and you're jumping ship, no biggie, whatever. And it's a common occurrence. So even if you've signed The Rock, even if you've signed Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, all these people, that's great. It could turn on a dime. If you've got a plan to represent Conor McGregor and he's going to star in an Endeavor content movie, right? Endeavor content will produce the movie and they'll do, these this big event and an opening for the movie, like let's say Roadhouse or something, and they're going to do on location VIP stuff. So that's all under your Endeavor wheelhouse. You end up getting a lot of profit from anybody that's paying to go see this, all that stuff. Or you're selling the rights to the movie, you're making the profit, et cetera, et cetera. Connor could end up jumping to CAA or wherever pretty easily. And so that was the first problem. The second problem is while you've got something like the UFC, right? And you've got you know, on location VIP experiences, which is easy, right? Apex, or if you're going to UFC 300 or whatever, the VIP, they used to be UFC VIP experiences. Now they're that presented by On Location. Okay, great. You cater to upscale clientele. You're able to make pretty good margins on that. You can combine it with a sports property you own. You can also combine it with PBR, professional bull riding, which you own. Great, all that stuff. But how does PBR and UFC really work together? And they don't, right? Like that's not the synergy. But when people are going to think about your sports properties, they're going to think UFC, PBR. You're going to say, well, I can provide on location for both of them. They're still going to try and connect those two, right? Um, and it's not that it's not hard. It's not that it's hard to explain. Like, no, this is how it is. It's just it's not immediate. And that's a huge part of pitching, right? They talk about an elevator pitch for a reason, where you have to sell the idea to somebody because you have a very small window of their attention and time. People aren't just sitting there like giving hours and hours and saying, yes, like I'm going to spend all my time on this. No, you got to at least get a spark and get your foot in the door with an elevator pitch on this. And Endeavor's elevator pitch, I feel, is a tough one to make because to really encompass all of the different capabilities and all of the different assets and how they can work together to create that synergistic value, that 1 + 1 = X value. It's hard to condense that down into a quick elevator pitch because it's complex and it's not a straightforward idea. It's not something somebody's going to leap to on their own accord. And it's not to say it doesn't work. Obviously, in Endeavor's case, it has worked quite a bit, right? They've got a ton of value out of this. Even just the UFC stuff, they've been able to find some of these pieces and put them together in ways to reduce their debt and really start to show, at least financially, like, hey, here's our value. But Wall Street didn't really react when they did that. I mean, it definitely seemed like once you did the TKO uh, spinoff with UFC and WWE, and then again, you're the 51% shareholder. You're pitching it as here's where we can make all these back end efficiencies by reducing personnel, uh, talking about sponsorships and global partnerships and networking and growth. And we see that, right? We've seen the Prime logo on WrestleMania and all these Prime spots where they're going into the Prime, like throwing each other into this giant Prime bottle and all these other things. Like you can see it now pretty clearly where some of the stuff that UFC's been doing for a while, WWE is now adopting. And I'm sure behind the scenes, at least from what I've heard, at least production wise, right? Some of the UFC changes have happened where they've taken the lead of WWE guys. You can see all that. You can start to see it now. It's going to get more and more apparent. But when they spun off the UFC and combined it with WWE to make TKO, the stock didn't really sustain a big bump. It got a bump, right? It was like, great, shoot up because here's a new deal. We like it. Perfect. But then it kind of sat where it was, dropped a little. And it's not shocking that Ari is going to be frustrated when he sees a rival company like CAA get bought for $7 billion when his own stock is saying he's worth, not 7 billion, but not what he thinks it's worth, and he's tired of it. But the pitch was tough. It still is tough in some ways, right? To really get an idea of what the Endeavor flywheel does and how all of the vision of this grand entertainment conglomerate that can use all these different seemingly different areas and put them together to make that light bulb click for an investor to say, "Oh, right, this is where we get value." It's not happening. Silver Lake, who's worked with Endeavor forever, they can see it, and that's not shocking because they've been in the trenches with him for quite a while now, right? They initially worked on helping to have the Endeavor acquire the UFC. Um, and you've got TKO trying to acquire MotoGP, which is an interesting one. Apparently, had a $200 million more offer than Liberty Media, who ended up buying MotoGP. But TKO, right? Like again, that's a perfect example. UFC and wrestling, okay, not the same thing, but they're at least in the same realm. As an outside individual, as an investor, I can kind of see, okay, right, fighting, scripted fighting, all this stuff. Okay, I got it. But then TKO made a bid to buy motorcycle racing. And if you're the individual investor, you're looking there saying, wait, fighting, fake fighting, bikes? Are you going to do a Royal Rumble on bikes? Are you going to, have the bikes fight in the cage like Thunderdome, which would be awesome, by the way. Just heads up. I would be so for that. But again, what Endeavor is thinking is they're thinking of the back end synergies. They're thinking of production, of costs, of sponsorships, partnerships. And they're seeing, okay, if we get MotoGP here, we can get another higher revenue product, put it in here. We can work on putting our sponsors here. We can work on getting our stars to show up and promote MotoGP, grow the sport, do all this stuff. They're thinking of it from that angle. Wall Street isn't, though. Wall Street's not going to get that immediately. You have to take the time to explain, like, hey, right, I know adding motorcycles into wrestling and fighting don't seem to make a lot of sense, but here's why. Because of these global partnerships, because of the sponsorship opportunities where, like, we can get Prime on WWE or UFC or MotoGP and we can sell them on different packages and give them discounts and all this stuff. And we can get media rights where, okay, if you buy WWE's media rights for Raw, we'll give you a discount or a package deal with MotoGP, right? I talked a lot about how I thought UFC and WWE rights were going to be packaged together eventually. I'm still not 100% convinced that UFC doesn't end up at Netflix, um, given where Netflix is currently at, and given the relationship that WWE now has with Netflix, right? Not saying it's going to happen, but if they made an offer close to ESPN, I mean, and ESPN again, I think is going to fight tooth and nail that they'll. If I had to ultimately pick, let me just clarify. I think ESPN is going to get it, but I expect Netflix to make a strong bid. A lot of people are saying like, well, Netflix just got Raw. They're not going to get UFC. I would expect them to maybe do that. I wouldn't be shocked, to be honest. Whether they do or not, I don't know. And whether, ESPN is probably going to push hard. NBA rights are being talked about right now. That's going to be a huge factor. If ESPN doesn't get NBA, they are almost certainly going to go all out for UFC. And it's going to come down to numbers. But the point is there is synergy there. It's just not what you might immediately think of. And that's part of the issue here. That's part of why investors, institutional and individual, didn't really get on board with Endeavor. They bought TKO stock more, and even TKO stock fell a bit, right? Given all the lawsuit stuff, all those other things, sure. But they bought that, but that's easy for an investor to say, "Oh, WWE, UFC, great. I can see where they can cross over and you could have both fans and blah blah blah." And again, if you're hardcores like us, the actual crossover is like 5% ish, but I get the idea, right? And I totally get the idea, especially when you have people like Brock Lesnar who did both, things like that. And just getting the idea, that's the main point. Is more investors are going to get that idea than they're going to get Endeavor's flywheel of corporate synergy idea. It's a little bit complex. So, already said enough of this. Silver Lake, go ahead and take us private. We'll get our payout, and then you guys can do what you want. And what Silver Lake is almost certainly going to do, right? They're taking them private. They're doing all this. I can't imagine they don't continue to add value and find ways to chop off some of Endeavor's businesses that might not make sense, or they work at least building the sales pitch a little bit more. I could see them acquiring more pieces and trying to fit them together to make an easier and clearer picture. But private equity tends to take something private, even if it's good or bad, take it private, get it to make more money, and then sell it off or sell parts of it off. I would imagine that's the end goal of Silver Lake here, right? Silver Lake is not going to be the Endeavor conglomerate company. I think they're going to work on repackaging that pitch, adjusting whether that's through mergers and acquisitions or sell offs. They're going to adjust certain pieces and repackage it to sell it to someone else or to maybe take it public again eventually. Although, again, when you've gone public and then back to private, can be a trickier road to go back to public again. But I don't think they're there to buy Endeavor and then this is now like part of our core company forever, right? I that doesn't fit with me. Other than they have a lot of good partnerships and sponsorships behind the scenes, so maybe. But again, I would imagine Silver Lake is buying to do the repackaging to get more value in the sales and sell off certain pieces so that they can make their profit and get out because that's the typical P&E model. So we'll see what happens with this. But yeah, this was kind of inevitable after the TKO spinoff, and then Endeavor kind of stagnated. Right? Um, it's it's the market couldn't digest the idea. That's my take on it. Um, and I think moving forward, you're going to see pieces of Endeavor get sold off, certain pieces, and you're going to see others get pushed hard and put together in new and different ways. That's what I think the long term roadmap is. Whether that's 5 years, 10 years, what have you, less would be ideal probably from Silver Lake's point of view. But 5 year roadmap at least, right? I think it's a lot of repackaging. It's selling off certain pieces of Endeavor and trying to figure out what to do with it. Let me know your thoughts on the whole thing. I hope I explained that well, right? Again, it's all about the elevator pitch, guys. That's my thoughts. All right, next up, we need to talk about UFC 300. If you haven't watched this card, again, phenomenal top to bottom. Only a couple fights were not exhilarating. Finishes all around. I don't know if I'd rank it personally as my top MMA card of all time, but it's close. I mean, it's up there, and it was, yeah, fantastic. We were blessed because of this. We were blessed by Dana White putting out another media hit video. This time seemed to have more YouTube podcasters. You had Brendan Schaub. You had a couple Reddit comments, which absolutely killed me. I'm very excited for the next time he does this because it's just hilarious on so many levels. But with that piece and then PR as well, we got some numbers about the promotion. So we got a 1.86 in the prelims on ESPN, which is the most watched prelims in history for the UFC. I mean, that's a great number, 1.86. That's what some regular shows do. I mean, the only one I have to compare it to is what I guess WWE Raw used to do. But I mean, it's a top number, right? It's very, very good, especially for prelims. Early prelims also did very well. I think 1.4 or something. So I mean, with this many former champions, with this many fan favorites, it's not shocking that a lot of people turned out for this, right? You opened up with Garbrandt, a former bantamweight champion, against Figueiredo, a former flyweight champion, and both of those guys had a little bit of followings, especially Garbrandt when he reached the top. So not shocked by the prelims doing this well, other than it eclipsed all the other prelims that have ever happened on ESPN in the ESPN era. So that's great. Yeah, the number one trend in China for 3 straight days, the third highest gate in UFC history, and the highest gate in the T-Mobile Arena. Um, highest attendance, or highest attendance, at least T-Mobile Arena in UFC history. Um, highest per capita merch sales, uh, things like that. Per capita merch sales, I don't know if that's huge, right? It seems, yeah. Um, the fact that it's the highest teen mobile attendance kind of tells you, like, right, it's not the stadium shows, the which have happened before, right? Other than that, though, it was the highest like arena show, I think, outside of the what was the whatever the one stadium was. The home Rousey stadium show in Australia. I think this was the highest outside of that type of thing. At least I saw that somewhere and then didn't see it again, so I'm not 100% sure on that. I've tried to find it, but I just haven't had time to really nail that down. But either way, when you look at a lot of these numbers, a lot of them are significant in that, again, highest prelims, uh, gate, third highest gate, which is big, um, trending in China, a big deal, especially for that market and a market they want to continue to make inroads to. But it's not this end all be all event breaking records everywhere that some people have made it out to be. And something like the highest per capita merch sales, like that is great, but there's a reason it's per capita, not the highest merch sales ever, right? Same with the highest attendance outside of in Teen Mobile history and outside of arenas, right? It's not the highest attendance ever. It's not as big as Home Rousey was, or I think there might be another one I'm missing, right? Probably a McGregor, right? Something like that. It's third highest gate. That's great. Third highest gate is a big number, but it's not the highest gate. Um, I know a lot of people were disappointed by the main event, and I understand not how it actually went, but just on paper. And I understand that, right? Like 200, obviously on paper, the original 200 was it. When you had Diaz McGregor rematch, um, so many other good fights throughout that card. I mean, it was, and then obviously it kind of fell apart. Even when Diaz McGregor fell apart, then they did Jones Cormier too, and that fell apart. So they had some issues all around, but it was this was something where outside of the main event, and Dana, and to his credit, right, um, did a great job pushing as though the media had fumbled the bag on this, and that this was this incredible thing. Dana's very good at riling up his fan base and pushing the narrative of, like, look at what all these fools said, and then we broke all these records. We're great. That's what his job partially is as a promoter. Does he take it a little bit to a level of pettiness? I don't know. I mean, again, honestly, I love it, the fact that he does this, because it's just amazing on so many levels. But from a business perspective, what he's doing is reinforcing part of the brand he's built and part of an audience he knows to cater to, right? Like, personal feelings aside, if you look at this style of promoting, this is what he's done in the past and it's helped reinforce and build his audience. This is very similar to other certain audiences, right? Some political. Obviously, he's got ties to former President Donald Trump, and Donald Trump uses some of these strategies to rile up his base and to kind of push these narratives. And that obviously works with him. Dana's doing that type of promoting here, where he's saying, these guys were all against us. They all doubted us. All these haters, look at everything we accomplished. They were all wrong. Here's the video clips. We got you, type of thing. And that promotion goes far with the hardcore fans and some of the fans he's trying to attract, quite frankly. That works. I know some of you are listening to this saying, like, how in the world could, but it does. If you look at the numbers, if you look at how he's consistently done this, it tends to work out in his favor because you get media backlash, you get people doing all this other stuff, but it just draws more attention to the brand as a whole. And that's what he does as a promoter. It's not necessarily the all press is good press, right? When you're talking about negative spins, but it's a way of doing that where he pushes this narrative of everyone was against us and we killed it. The same thing I've seen happen at I don't know how many startups when they're like, nobody thought we could hit this crazy quarter goal or this yearly goal. And then we worked our butts off and we not only did we do that, but we landed the big deals. We landed these crazy accounts. It's that cult of personality push to make the employees, to make everybody who's a part of it feel like they're winning and that they're part of something bigger that's, untouchable, is superior in certain ways. That's part of this promotion. So I'm not going to sit here and say UFC 300 wasn't successful because it's not. I mean, that would be ludicrous. It was clearly a very successful event. Is it the top selling pay-per-view of all time? The top merch, top highest gate, all this other stuff? No, it doesn't. It's not that. And it was never gonna be that, right? Especially with this headliner. Um, if you threw McGregor Chandler on there or something, I think then you break all the records and it's not even funny, but why would they do that, right? This was an event where they're able to showcase the promotion, showcase several stars they want to become further stars, and then you save McGregor Chandler for 303, which they announced, and then put the undercard on that being much less paid, have a couple good fights here and there. We'll see what they do for International Fight Week because it should line up with around the time that normally their big Chicago card can be. So they might end up because they sometimes stack that card. So maybe 303 will end up being pretty stacked, or at least more stacked than a normal pay-per-view, right? Um, but my guess is that it will be less bigger names, especially compared to 300, but still bigger than maybe 301, right? That has Pantoja, Urchek, and obviously you have Aldo coming back to help boost that, but not a lot of other names on that card, at least from a big name standpoint. 303 will be kind of like that, but they don't want to maximize your margin. You want to put in McGregor and Chandler. You know that will sell a crazy amount of pay-per-views, probably more than 300 and any other event this year. And then you make sure that you have lower tiered fighters underneath, a couple of other names just to kind of round out the card, but then lower tier fighters on the prelims and things like that, so that way, right, you can maximize your profit margin. Your fighter cost total is lower. If you people were saying, why didn't they put Connor Chandler on UFC 300? You would have blown up your fighter cost budget. Would it have sold and broken all these records? Of course. Would you have made as much margin as putting them on a different card? I don't think so. And my guess is they probably did the math and came to that same conclusion. And that's what the UFC is about. Dana is all about business. This is how he's always been. I keep trying to tell people, yes, he has his quirks. Yes, he has his ideals, but he is a businessman through and through, and so is everyone else that works at the company. Hunter, like the top executives are all very business number driven. It's what they do. So I think they figured out the margin calculations there, decided to put McGregor Chandler on something else. And while UFC 300 is still an amazing pay per view, it's not the best all time in terms of business metrics. But Dana's still pushing the narrative of like, look, everybody thought it was going to be terrible, but we got the most social media impressions, right? That was another big one. Is 3.2 million more social media followers or whatever. Which, yeah, that's a great engagement metric from a marketing standpoint. Great, but in terms of your overall funnel conversion, which if you know anything about marketing, you want to get as many people as possible. We've talked about this a little bit, but you want to get as many people as possible, and then you want to get them converted all the way down to a paying customer. But on each tier of don't know about it to kind of know about it to semi interested, right? You only get a small percentage of each tier converted. So you want this huge funnel of people. So if you have 3 million, maybe only 5% get to the next level, but that 5% still ends up being quite a bit of money if it gets all the way through, right? That type of conversion. Um, that's something where, yeah, that's a great number. It's a huge, huge boost, but it's not most pay-per-views of all time. It's not all this stuff. And again, UFC 300 was immensely successful, especially with who was in the headliner. We know from Paul Giff's analysis on Fighter MRP and, you know, typical consumer habits of purchasing power that main event and co-main event usually are the two biggest driving factors for if someone buys a pay-per-view. And I love Poatan, and I think he's got some star power, but he's not a Adesanya, he's not a John Jones, he's not a McGregor, a Rousey, right? I'm sure they still probably did well pay-per-view wise. Um, I don't know about the million number. We'll talk about that in quick hits, but I think it's something where it's important to note this was a very successful event, but it's not the most successful event, despite being up there as one of the greatest cards of all time. From a business perspective, great. But that's part of the reason the narrative was pushed. And obviously, ESPN said, he came out with a statement like, we love the numbers, it's all great, blah, blah, blah. But if they truly got, million plus pay per view buys, Disney's going to announce that. Similar to when they announced the McGregor return against Cerrone, right? They will, if they get a million plus, they will almost certainly on their quarterly call announce that, especially because they just got done fighting off a corporate raider and they've got a bunch of other internal issues going on. They're going to showcase their big wins, and a million plus pay per view buys for UFC 300 would be a big win. So on their next quarterly earnings call, if UFC 300 really did over a million, I would imagine they would say something. I know that's the rumor number. It's trending that way, is what SBJ said, um, according to Dana White, right? Uh, but I think they will tout it pretty highly, given that they've talked about pay per view numbers before, and we're in a better fiscal position. This is something where I can't imagine they don't mention it if it happened, and even if it didn't break a million buys, I'm guessing it's still one of the higher pay per views of the past couple of years. Where it landed, I don't know. Right, I don't have the sources on that, um, but it's definitely successful. Just it's not the best business pay per view of all time. That all being said, one other key factor here we have to talk about is in terms of the impact of the promotion and where they go now. Right, obviously with 301 and the couple of Apex cards coming out, you've got a lot of fans complaining, all this other stuff. This probably buys them enough time to get through those cards, to rebuild, make 303 obviously your big thing between McGregor and Chandler. This probably gives them some goodwill in terms of pay per view buys and other things in a year where they're trying to showcase that a little bit more for TKO, right? They're trying to hit that 1.15 billion revenue guidance. Um, 300 probably buys them goodwill in case these other pay per views for Q2 don't go the way they want, in terms of numbers and things like that, which I think is smart from a strategic perspective, right? Uh, you have a big Q2 pay per view. to help out with 301, which I don't know how well that will do. And that's again, that's just how it shakes out. And everybody's going to be looking forward to 400, right? 10 years from now or whatever it is, you'd best believe 400 will be another event that people are going to remember how awesome 300 was. And even if they become a semi casual viewer or just kind of a casual viewer, they might just remember, wow, 300 was so amazing. They're going to do that again. I got to see 400. I got to see how they top that. I think the lore of this card and just how well it worked out perfectly for them. No cancellations, very entertaining, crazy fights. I mean, couldn't ask for much more given the scenario you were in. So, and given I really don't think Dana got the main event he wanted. I'm not gonna say the speculations I heard on what he was trying to get done, but um, I did hear a couple of different fights being floated that were not this. And so for that being the main event and it doing so well, that's a big win for them. And he's going to push this narrative, which is his job, is to push this narrative as a massive win. So that's my thought on UFC 300 business. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you saw the card and enjoyed it. I'm assuming you did if you're watching this podcast. But yeah, it didn't, not the best card business wise, still a great card business wise, not the tippy top though. Important distinction. All right, next up we have our quick hit segments. We have four of them to get through, so I'll get through them as fast as I possibly can. First up, we have COSM. I think that's how you say it. COSM. Augmented Shared Reality Experience Theaters will be hosting UFC 303, the one in LA specifically, I believe. So this is a theater featuring, something like 87,000 LED lights and 8K video and stuff, and it gives you kind of like a augmented reality type viewing. You just go and sit in the theater. I don't know that it's exactly like the Sphere, but it's kind of like that, I think. Either way, this is something where this company partnered with the UFC and NBA back a while ago. We covered it then, I believe, in Quick Hits as well. Just interesting new type of technology and sell new product essentially. Now they're starting to open these theaters. I know the one in Dallas, not too far from me, is going to be opening sometime in the summer, or at least was supposed to be. That's the schedule for it. But this is an interesting new type of product. If you're going to this theater to watch Theater 3, let me know. I'd love to hear about your experience. But it's going to be very, very curious to see how well this product and service does in the market. I guess you call it more a service than a product. But how this does, what people's appetites are for paying for this experience, right? Is it going to be as unique as the Sphere or something where like people just absolutely love it? It's going to be a brand new thing. Are they going to transition to movies and certain things like that? Is it going to be just kind of one offs or just big events? And I don't think they're transitioning to movies or talking about that really, but definitely for big sporting events and things like that. I've talked to one person who had done it and said it was pretty cool, but let me know if you're going to do this because I'd love to hear more on anybody's experience with this. I am very curious to see how well this will do. If it'll take off, it'll blow up and they'll keep building them. If it will be kind of just like work out for a couple of years and then fade away. Is it a fad trend? Is it, interesting stuff. So let me know on that. Next thing, we have a big win for the UFC in New York, where they have been fighting for a while now to lower the tax on MMA tickets. New York has the highest MMA ticket tax at 8.5%. State has essentially passed everything through the state assembly where it's going to be signed, as far as I know, to drop it down to 3%. That's big because that's a 5.5%, you know, per ticket revenue increase for the UFC essentially. I don't think this is going to change ticket prices too much, right? I think the UFC will still have the overall prices around the same as what they've been doing for MSG events and that type of growth rate, but they're just more than likely going to take that extra 5.5% that used to go to the tax and government. They'll just probably pocket that. Maybe not the whole thing. Maybe they'll do kind of a split, but maybe they'll only take 4.5% and they'll lower prices a bit. Who knows? I would imagine you're going to end up seeing they're already doing the yearly MSG event as one of their big staple pay-per-views. You might see more pay-per-views in the area, like in Buffalo, or some areas, and you might see more fight nights out there, but I don't know that it will be a huge uptick in events. I do think, though, it will increase the amount of events the UFC does there every couple of years. I think that's pretty much guaranteed. Um, Next, we have NXT announcing Battleground PLE Premium Live Event, as WWE calls it, at the UFC Apex. So UFC sent out a press release for this, where essentially they're going to do an NXT show at the Apex. It's been mixed reactions from the wrestling fan community. Um, I don't think it will be like the Apex, right, where you're just going to have like a couple of seats and then people watching. But I do think On Location will probably be doing most of the VIP stuff, which again helps TKO overall. I don't know if they were doing that stuff beforehand or not. It's going to be interesting to see what it looks like. The Apex is a smaller arena, right? Um, and not that NXT is going to huge arenas generally. I mean, I think WrestleMania weekend they went to a bigger arena because it was WrestleMania weekend and they know they could draw people in. But when they came to Austin, for example, right, they ran the Cedar Park arena, which is the same type of arena that AEW had run a couple times, which is nice and has seats, but it isn't like the Moody Center or a giant stadium that has 20,000 seat capacity. Apex is going to be smaller than that, but I don't know if it'll make the show more intimate, if it'll make it um, still have the same feel. I would imagine I've not watched really NXT too much, but they have for their like what is it? Their weekly show, they seem to be in smaller areas. I think it'll probably be closer to that type of feel. But either way, it's an interesting move. Again, cost synergies there in terms of saving costs because TKO owns it. Production also is saved because they'll be running it. Any VIP experiences will go through On Location, which TK also owns. So it just helps increase their revenue and their margins. That's why they're doing it. It's going to keep happening unless this is an outright crazy disaster, which I doubt it will be because it's not a pay per view, right? WWE does these premium live events, but it's not pay per view. You just have to own Peacock streaming service, pay their monthly streaming fee, and you've got it. I can't imagine they're not going to keep doing this. And then last but not least, one we have to touch on is Sports Business Journal numbers. So I have been a big proponent of Sports Business Journal and their numbers. If you've listened to this podcast, right, I've generally trusted them with their pay-per-view numbers and some other things like that. I was a big fan of John Orand, who ended up leaving and doing his varsity newsletter. Follow him if you like sports stuff in general. He's still great, still doing important stuff. But since that's happened, we still get some important stories about the UFC through SBJ, but it's been brought to my attention that there's enough conflict of interest and some of their sourcing has been a little suspect of late that I'm not sure we could trust their numbers anymore. Breaks my heart to say that. I'm not fully ruling them out, but right now I'm putting a moratorium on trusting their pay-per-view buys. They did announce, trending towards 1 million pay-per-view buys per Dana White, which is important that they at least said, Dana saying this, not us. But they also had the numbers from UFC 100 and 200, which were incorrect, as pointed out by John Nash. And then Fight Opinion on Twitter also pointed out that, they kind of they have a deal where Endeavor is a major sponsor for a sports business talk, like gala type thing that they do. So there's enough conflict of interest there at this point. And the numbers, there's at least two instances of numbers that I was surprised they talked about, even with clarifiers. I'd say a quick moratorium on pay per view buy numbers from them. We'll see. I'm not ruling them out completely, but at least right now, I think it's important to do that. All right. Those are the quick hits. Let me know if I missed anything. But yeah, that's what we got for this week. All right. Last thing we're going to talk about, and we're going to have to keep it short just due to time, is PFL's expansion into the European market continues. So, top prospect, free agent prospect, Paul Hughes, did sign with PFL. A lot of people on Twitter and other social media stating it was a big win for PFL, big name. And someone they were surprised the UFC didn't go after more. I know there's another guy, I think it's Paul, I don't know if it's Polares, um, that is also rumored to be signing with PFL. And then you obviously had Cedric Doumbé, Yeah, I hope I'm saying that right. Probably not, but part of my charm. But he signed, right? And that was a big, what many considered a big miss on the UFC's part. PFL continues to get these hot European prospects and to move into that market, doing the Champion Series, moving and doing things with Bellator in that area. And this is something that Bellator was trying to do before they were acquired, right? We saw them do and announce the European Series where it wasn't like a tournament, but they would, commit to several shows in the UK or in different, places in Europe, Italy, things like that, um, to try and capture some of that market. And with some of these guys, it's important to note that while US, right, does pay the most in terms of pay-per-views and all this other stuff, it's the richest entertainment consumer, one would say. Um, some of these other shows that other promotions have done have been massive, right? PFL, the Paris show was essentially 14,000 sold out, just about, for Cedric, and that's insane from a standpoint of a promotion putting that on that's not the UFC. Um, it's a huge win in PFL's book, and I think they've seen that and they've decided they're going to continue to pull and move into this market because they believe if they can get Paul Hughes and some of these other guys to be bigger stars, then they can tour in Europe and help reinforce this image of the Champions League type esque MMA and win over people, much like, you know, soccer football over there is so massive and it's not as big here. Now it's growing in the US and all that stuff, but obviously, if you look at soccer and you look at what the top stars make and they make so much money, there's money out there to be had in the European market if you can grab it. And it's not that the UFC is never going back to any place in Europe, right? They're obviously going to continue going back to Europe. I know WWE is going to Europe. They're doing their Backlash pay per view over there. I'm sure the UFC will, in France, UFC will go over there. All this other stuff. No, it's not that UFC isn't going to go do that and isn't still the top dog in that area. It's that there is certainly a market over there that can be reached through top prospects, at least in the PFL's mind. That's the strategy here. When they talk about the comparisons to the Champions League, that's not a coincidence. They're trying to get European fans to see the value and the appeal of watching PFL. Think about if you are a giant soccer or footy fan and you're watching and you understand how the league system works and all this other stuff, and then somebody's like, "Hey, you want to watch MMA?" And they're like, I've been kind of," but it's like, dude, this is like the Champions League of MMA. They do tournaments, they do points, all this other stuff. That might resonate much more with them than say an American who never watches soccer or doesn't understand the system or anything like that. And they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" Right? Why aren't you talking about football, American football, right? Um, so it's not a bad call. Especially if, Hughes goes out there, is able to put on some big performances, and then they're able to use him in even just half the way they were able to use Cedric, and they're able to kind of sell out some of these arenas and move. That helps them quite a bit. PFL is still in the stages of growth as a startup where ticket sales are important, right? There's that joke that, they struggle with the tickets. They're giving free tickets away in the US, all this stuff. In some cases, that might be true, right? For some events, they might be giving away tickets or having to do discounts and all of this stuff. But then you have the Paris show. Then you might have the Hughes show, and that's big for an organization like the PFL that has to go and sell to investors to show growth. That's a metric they can use and say, look, we went to France, we sold out a 14,000 person arena. We've got Paul Hughes. We went to the UK. We sold out 5, 6,000, 7,000. That's big. That's very, very big. So it makes sense that they're going this route too, because the US is still the UFC's home, obviously, and it's not where the UFC, at least at the moment, is focusing heavily, right? Or sorry, Europe is not. I mean, that's not to say they're not, right? Obviously, they had the movement with Gone. They still have the UK with Paddy Pimblett. and re-upping those rights. But now that those media rights have been re-upped in the UK and other areas, they're talking about going to Africa. They're talking about focusing more. They've got Road to UFC 3, and they're talking about trending in China and trying to get the Southeast, and Asia market. That's important because the UFC's got to focus on particular key markets in order to keep up their revenue, which gives PFL an opportunity to focus just heavily on one area that maybe UFC is not going to see as much value going after or competing and spending resources to compete over. And that allows PFL to start clawing away some of UFC's market share, right? Um, it's not that PFL is going to end up, this route is not going to make PFL bigger than UFC anywhere near overnight. I don't think this route would allow PFL to become bigger than the UFC, frankly, because I think if it gained enough traction, the UFC would start to really compete and see some red flags, alarm bells would go off, and they would do what they could to maintain their European market dominance. But it is an area where I feel, especially given the UFC's current roadmap and what they've kind of hinted is their roadmap, right? Going to Africa, again, focus in China, and where and Asia in general. Um, Certain parts of Europe, but not really this year, right? Like we haven't heard a ton of that. I think this is an opportunity for them to Saudi Arabia actually is the one I was thinking of, right? Where they've got that new deal. That those are the heavy markets they're going after, at least for the next couple of years. They will still go to Europe, but that's their main focus. This is a market that UFC will probably be more willing to leave untouched at the moment. Maybe they have WWE go more to Europe, which it seems they're doing Clash at the Castle and some of these other things great, but it's not a true competitor to MMA. PFL can take advantage of it. They definitely can. I'm sure they've done analysis that basically tells them like, "Hey, this is probably where we should be headed. We should try and take away some of this market share." They're not going to take away all of it. It's not that PFL is going to be the top dog in Europe in the next year or 2 years, but that's not what PFL needs to do right now. PFL just needs to start building revenue, building towards profitability, and selling more to investors and to stakeholders saying, "Hey, look, we're starting to make inroads here. We're starting to sell out arenas, things like that. And this is a place they can probably do that without being under the threat of direct competition too often, given the UFC's current known roadmap. Not to say UFC doesn't pivot, all this other stuff, but right now, it's definitely a market that they can start to eat away at. And that's why I think they're going there. Again, lots of caveats with that. They're not going to become a direct competitor, 1 and 2 right here with the UFC overnight. But I do think it is an opportunity for growth for the PFL. And that's what the PFL really needs right now. And they're doing well in that regard, right? They've This season will be big for them. They've signed more names and bigger names, especially on the prospect front, than they have in a long time. Not just old UFC retirees or veterans. They've signed some new hot prospects. This is going to help them build up that market and hopefully help them grow further. So I think it's a good call. We'll see how it turns out. Obviously, if Hughes or Doumbé gets beaten pretty badly and they paid a high price for this, could be an issue, but least on paper, this seems like a good route to go. We'll see if it translates right, and if it helps them. But I think it's about as best of an option as they can take, given where they are right. All right, everybody, that wraps up another episode of the Fight Business Podcast. Appreciate you if you're listening on Stitcher, or I guess Stitcher's dead. Apologies. Apple, Spotify, any of the main podcast listening devices. Appreciate you as always. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like, subscribe, bell notification, share this with everybody who likes business stuff. Really appreciate it. I know I've been gone for a while. I will be gone for a little bit. I don't know that I'll get one out next week. If not, definitely the week after. Still got some traveling and some fun jury duty obligations I have to do. But we will be back in May for sure. So look out for maybe an episode last week of April, early May, but we're definitely coming back in full force and appreciate you guys as always. Until next time, get money.